Thank you so much for coming today. I need to be closer. All right, thank you, Jim. Hello. I am Robin Axel Adams. I am the manager of the Fairbanks Center for Medical Ethics. And as the room is working on gathering together, we'll just remind everybody in the room that we are not doing paper evaluations anymore. And so please do make sure that you did sign in at the front so that we can send your information in to CE and CME so that you can get credit for being here. We are recording our broadcast today, so if anybody thinks how marvelous and amazing it is and you want to hear words again or you want to pass along the information, by next week it'll be on our website, fairbankscenter.org, and you can look for the lecture link and hear it again. We are also broadcasting today to a variety of hospitals around the state of Indiana, so we welcome those who are listening by broadcast today. I just want to remind you to silence your device. And if you do need to take a call, to please do so outside of here. And Kevin has no financial conflicts that he needs to disclose. So Kevin Armstrong is IU Health's Chief of Staff and Executive Vice President of Missions and Values. In his mission and values role, Kevin promotes the mission and values of IU Health and ensures that they are integrated into all aspects of the healthcare organization. Prior to his role at IU Health, Kevin was the president of the Methodist Health Foundation, predecessor of the current IU Health Foundation, the organization which philanthropically supports IU Health. Kevin has written and taught for religious, civic, and government audiences. He's authored or co-authored numerous books and articles for academic and public audience, and he has directed an 11-part PBS series on faith and community, the public role of religion. So it was about a year ago that I was sitting with Kevin, and Kevin was sharing with me about the enterprise goals that IU Health and the School of Medicine were going to focus on together. As the Fairbanks Center for Medical Ethics talked together, we decided that we wanted to contribute to the conversation. We wanted to see how we could influence or impact those initiatives. And so we decided to use our lecture series as a way to highlight and to bring maybe a different lens to those topics. And so our goal for the next couple of years is to bring speakers to this place, to this forum, on each of the topics that you're going to be hearing about today. And when we talked to those amazing leaders of each of those enterprise goals, we agreed that it would be good to have an introduction to sort of set the stage about why we are having these conversations in the first place and why these goals are so important to IU Health and the School of Medicine. And so it is just like when you bring up a good idea and you end up chairing that committee. Kevin, who shared with me about the initiatives, has been invited, not to chair the committee, but to set the stage for us, on this very important conversation about the ways that IU Health and the School of Medicine are going to work together to impact our neighborhood. And so, Kevin, I'll invite you to come forward and share with us.
Thanks, Robin. In 10 years, Indiana will be one of the healthiest states in America. It happens every time I say it. How many of you believe that's possible? Somebody tell me why. Why do you believe that it is possible that Indiana can be one of the healthiest states in 10 years? What? Sorry. They just did it to please you? Is that what you said? Anybody who believes that it's a possibility. Folks, this is going to be interactive, which means that you also have to talk. Because we're having the conversation is the start. Are humans not any different than others? Yeah, an organization that's talking about it and focused on it. Now let's hear the other side. Those of you who didn't raise your hand, why do you think it's not possible for Indiana to be one of the healthiest states in 10 years?
Our state legislature doesn't support it.
Public policy isn't supportive.
We're already so far
We are so far down the list.
Issues with federal government.
Federal government issues. Something in mind with that one?
Just particularly, there seems to be little to no support for things like the acknowledgement that global warming is real. Therefore, that encompasses every state.
All right. One more? Hoosiers are stubborn people. Usually in this kind of exchange, somebody says, have you ever been to the state fair? I believe it's possible that Indiana can be one of the healthiest states in America. And I believe that what you're going to hear over the next several months with regard to the enterprise goals will help you understand that the movement that needs to take place is not so much like this as it is like this. But today, I'd like to offer perhaps an unusual framework that as you come back to these lectures and talking about those enterprise goals that have to do with smoking cessation, with obesity, with infant mortality, and with behavioral health, particularly with regard to the opioid crisis, that this framework might give you a slightly different perspective on how to think about these things, particularly as it relates to our interactions in the larger community and not just inside our buildings. But in order to do that, I have to separate out those of you who belong to the Queen of Hearts camp and those of you who belong to Alice's camp. You remember the Lewis Carroll novel, The Queen of Hearts is speaking to Alice, and she says, I can't possibly believe that. And the Queen of Hearts says, oh dear, if only you could, why wait? I was your age. Sometimes I would just close my eyes and take a long breath, and I would be able to believe 6 impossible things before breakfast. Well, it's lunchtime, and as we start this conversation, I'm going to ask you to believe 3 seemingly impossible things. Now, judging by the median age in this auditorium, many of you have probably not read Alice in Wonderland, but perhaps saw Johnny Depp on screen instead. Even if you did, you may or may not know as background that when Lewis Carroll tells this story of this exchange, he's actually talking about a real event going on in his life. There was dissension going on in the parts of the church where he was involved. There were those who believed in the literal miracles that were in the Bible, that they took place as stated, and those who believed they were myths, a way of telling stories. And so to believe impossible things was to characterize the conversation of, is it true in the sense of actually happening, or myth in the sense of representing truth? 3 impossible things that you may need to believe in order to move along. The first is this, that clinical greatness is only one of our health system's critical assets. Now, that may seem odd, standing in the adult academic health center where we pride ourselves on that tripartite mission of research and education and patient care, where we market and advertise that we are the best of the best in the state of Indiana, and in fact, we reward clinical greatness above just about anything else. And yet, in order to tackle these enterprise goals, and I believe to reach out to our neighbors in a way that changes the health of this state, we have to acknowledge that clinical greatness is only one of our assets. Secondly, despite the fact that reimbursements are decreasing, the population is aging, acuity in older age is greater, there are still health systems and hospitals that are moving out beyond themselves and creating healthier communities that are not related to their clinical skills so much as it's related to something else. And finally, the impossibility that I would ask you to consider, and Lewis Carroll's phrase has frequently been used to describe imagination. Our success in these enterprise goals, our success in making healthier communities, those solutions are likely to come from the people and the places that we most often regard as the problem rather than the solution. We are known for our clinical excellence. Let's just stop and acknowledge that. Magnet hospitals, recognition by U.S. News and World Report, the School of Nursing, one of the largest, the med school, the largest, nationally ranked in 10 out of 10 pediatric services. In no way do I mean to diminish clinical effectiveness, nor do I hope that you will send an email to my boss and say, hey, you know this guy's dissing our core business? It is true. But why is that alone not going to change the health of the community? This is the interactive part again. Okay, it hasn't yet, so perhaps past history is a predictor of the future. Why else will this alone not change community health?
So much of what you're looking at there is inside of our walls, and community health is outside.
Yes. Yeah, so much is inside of our walls. What does it mean to go out? Jay?
This is about treatment after folks are already sick, helping people stay healthy for
Yeah, much of this is about people coming to our doorstep when they're ill or injured.
It's also where we get paid. We're paid.
Yeah, the reality is, those of you who work here, most of you get paid for being right here. You don't get paid for working out there. Some of you do in here. I'm glad to see you.
Also, human nature and behavior not necessarily changed by these items.
Yeah, I usually get my left-leaning friends a Twitter when I say the last great liberal myth is education. If only I can educate you to stop smoking, you're going to quit.
We have an illness care system, not a healthcare system.
We have an illness system, not a healthcare system. And very often that has been expressed in this way. You have seen some form of this, haven't you? Over the last 10 years, we have been focused on this notion of the social determinants of health. And notice that health care makes up only 20% of the well-being and the health of an individual. 30% of it is health behaviors. And here, over the course of the next year, in this room, you're going to be hearing from folks saying, how is it that we can influence those behaviors with regard to smoking and obesity and infant mortality and the larger behavioral health enterprise? But there's also the physical environment where you live. You've heard the statistics, have you not? That your health and well-being has more to do with your zip code than your genetic code. We have studies going on at IU Health right now to point out that there's about a 13-year discrepancy in life expectancy between the south end of the Monon Trail and the north end of the Monon Trail. And the socioeconomic factors. You want to talk about health? You can't just talk about what's currently in your medical chart. You have to talk about, do you have a place to live? Do you have a job? Is it secure? Do you feel safe? Do you have a network that supports you? Where does that come from? And so as you're thinking about these enterprise goals and moving forward, a part of what we have to consider is not just the ways in which we have previously been clinically effective, but the ways in which we partner and interact with others who have influence over these other social determinants of health.
Isn't access an issue?
Access is, of course, an issue. Yeah. Access not only in-house, but access to all of these other social determinants as well. And so one of the responses to this reality has been that over the last 10 years in American society, we've been talking about those institutions who have a disproportionate impact on those socioeconomic issues. We call them anchor institutions. Have you heard that phrase? Anchor institutions are primarily, by shorthand, the EDs and the MEDs. The educational institutions and the medical institutions, hospitals and universities. What makes them anchor institutions? A, they've probably been around longer than just about anybody else in your neighborhood or community. Secondly, they likely hire and employ among the largest number of people in that community. No exception with IU Health. Here in Indianapolis, the largest non-government employer is who? IU Health is now second. Who do you suppose is number one? Walmart. Anchor institutions contribute to community vitality in these ways. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but want you to have a frame of reference that as you're thinking about the enterprise goals, to think not, again, just about where we have historically been effective in vitality, but assets we forget that we even have that contribute to that. We're a major purchaser. What does it mean when we choose to purchase locally or to create enterprises locally in order to employ others and improve their health and their well-being? Housing, going to show you some examples of what it means when universities and health systems actually become real estate developers. Workforce, we've talked about. Core service provision. You just look over the landscape of Indianapolis, and as my friends who visit the city for the first time often say, it looks like you guys own the town. I see all these IU Health signs everywhere that I'm going. By our very presence, we stimulate growth and development. And the question I want you to have in your mind over the next several months as we talk about these other initiatives is, what are the ways that we are an anchor institution contributing perhaps not directly through our health and medical care, but through our workforce, through our presence, through our purchasing power, and through the role that we have in community influence because of those other four things along the way. Now, I need to ask you to believe a second impossible thing and use your imagination, and that is there are already hospitals and health systems who are using their leverage to change community health. Let me just give you a few examples. Housing, we know, is the great stabilizer. If we begin with housing, we create a stable place for that individual to live where we can then build. It's pretty difficult to tell someone, you know, you really ought to stop smoking when they don't know where they're going to live tonight. Or to address some of the root causes of infant mortality if you're moving from place to place to place without stability. How have some hospitals and health systems gone along the way? Cooper University in Camden, New Jersey has built over 100 apartments or houses for people who live in their neighborhood. One of the things that happens in health systems and hospitals when they move into a neighborhood is suddenly the place looks a lot more appealing to live, because hospitals have employees and patients and families who are looking for a place to eat, so restaurants pop up. And when restaurants pop up, stores find their way, and then maybe a motel or a hotel. And what happens is what? The people who lived there often get moved out, especially if they're low income or if they're renters and their landlord decides, I got a really valuable piece of property here. And so as part of an anchor institution in Camden, Cooper decided that they were going to do everything that they could to keep people in the neighborhood there. And so over 100 properties, mostly people who were already living there, but who were looking for a better place to live, providing the support services to make that happen, and everything from financial planning to home management. Johns Hopkins University, an interesting aspect with regard to housing, they offer $36,000 grants to their staff to live in the neighborhood. Bon Secours, who you'll hear a lot about, built more than 800 units of affordable housing and worked with residents to convert more than 640 vacant lots into green spaces. And then in Greenville, Bon Secours also developed a land trust through their staff. Do you see the leverage that academic health centers can have? I mean, there are health systems and hospitals which offer their name in order for people to be able to get loans for housing or to redevelop so that it can improve those social determinants of health. What about the environment, the air in which we breathe, the water that we drink? An exemplar in all this is Gunderson Lutheran Health System that not only saved $30 million in their own utilities, but created safer air and better water for their patients and their families, and spurred their own local community to take action in environmental issues. This health system became the first health system in the United States to become energy independent. Financial investments, there's a long list here. I just want to run through these quickly because I'm trying to spur your imagination and your innovation as we talk about these enterprise goals. Johns Hopkins, they created a well experience in a local Walgreens. What that means is they're bringing new health and wellness services into the local community. They offer healthy food. The store's partnering with faculty, offering community clinics, offering a smoking cessation program. Dignity Health, which covers California and Nevada and Arizona, provides loans and lines of credit to people who are below market rate for nonprofit borrowers to help them improve their communities. They support and contribute to financial institutions so that small businesses and affordable housing can spark growth. They've contributed $164 million worth of loans in support of 55 million small business and health food projects. Trinity Health, $2.5 million grant to address childhood obesity, using local markets in order to make healthier food affordable. Because as you know, if you've walked into any convenience store, you may be able to get a candy bar for $1, but that apple is going to cost you $1.25. And another Bon Secours, a charter school receiving funding from their local community development fund, and entrepreneurs supported. Again, building businesses around the community for local residents to improve their life, their well-being, and their health. And two more, just to give you an idea. In providing for food insecurity, at least the second on the list, some would say even more important than housing along the way. What does it mean to invest in a grocery store that also provides a community room where folks can learn to cook, can learn how to prioritize meals, and teaching customers how to eat and live in a healthy manner, while at the same time what they're actually doing is creating a web of support with each other. More examples of that. And finally, in job creation, one of the interesting things Johns Hopkins did in the effort to build a hotel so that their patient families would have a place to go nearby, is that they put their name on the loan for the developer under the condition that there would be low-income, unemployed, and underemployed residents of the neighborhood who would get jobs there. And so what about us? One of the top 20 health systems in the country. Can you think of any ways in which IU Health is contributing to alleviate those social determinants of health?
Community grants.
Community grants for what, William?
Well, sickle cell anemia initiative, community revitalization, that would be another initiative. Child obesity, that would be another for some of the clinic areas that we have to do.
Yeah, so community grants that are being pushed out into the neighborhood. Right. What else?
We look at that map, the very locations of IU Health around the state. That's a huge incentive also.
Sure. Do any of you know that the board recently created a $100 million investment endowment to be used for high-impact community investing in social determinants of health? Grant opportunities in the future for those who believe the impossible, who have the imagination of what are the ways in which we can be engaged. We're currently in conversations around the Indianapolis Adult Academic Health Center as we look to the large capital project to ask what are the ways we can be good neighbors in this place, allowing neighbors who want to stay and live in this neighborhood to do so, even while real estate values are likely to increase with the change in safety, lighting, infrastructure improvements, accessibility, small businesses. One way to take a look at what IU Health does in the larger community is, of course, to look at our community benefit report and our community investment. Barnes Jewish Hospital in St. Louis and IU Health here go back and forth from year to year in being either first or second in community investment of all health systems around the United States. Now, much of that is based on our heritage and our tradition of providing financial services to our patients who are not able to afford care. But you'll see other community investment in community benefit. I know there are a number of community outreach and engagement folks here who would be very happy for you to go on our website and look at our most recent community benefit report and community impact report to see the ways not just in Indianapolis, but in every one of the towns in which we are located, we have people moving out beyond the walls. My question to you is, how do we expand that? And how do we help it grow? And this, if it can be considered anything else other than Kevin's ramblings and actually be an ethics lecture, is where we get to that point. Because I believe that one of the ways in which we will succeed, not only in those enterprise goals, but improving community health, rests in a story that Martin Luther King frequently told. Monday, we're celebrating MLK Day. It was 51 years ago that Dr. King was assassinated. Anybody know where that picture was taken? You can probably guess. Memphis, the town in which he was assassinated. Dr. King had come to Memphis for a sanitation workers' strike. And the people around him, who were also leaders in the civil rights movement, were just beside themselves. Memphis. Why are you going to Memphis? Birmingham, we understand. Selma, we understand. Why would you go to a sanitation worker strike in Memphis? It doesn't advance the cause. A Nobel Peace Prize winner going to a sanitation worker strike? Taylor Branch provides the background to that story. Taylor Branch, the historian of the civil rights movement, says that in 1968, sanitation workers were no longer allowed to eat their lunch outside of their truck. It was considered by the city officials to be picnicking. And so they were required, all four on the truck, if they wanted to eat their lunch, to do it inside the cab of the truck, which did not house four people. And so on one day, while it was raining, two of the sanitation workers went around to the back of the truck to the compartment where something happened with the electrical system, and those two workers were crushed and killed. Is it any wonder that during the civil rights movement, African Americans would wear a sign that says, "I am a man, I am a woman"? Why? That's not how they had been treated. But on the night before he died, while Dr. King was in Memphis, he told a story that he often told, that many of you know in some form or another, and which I think points us in a slightly different direction in order to consider how we approach these challenges. He told a story about a man who went down a dangerous road and was attacked and was robbed and was left for dead. And a couple of professionals came by and passed right by him. And it was someone least expected who actually stopped and helped that individual. Dr. King says, we have no idea why those first two didn't stop. Perhaps they were busy physicians on the road to the hospital to take care of their own patients. Perhaps they were on the way to the Jericho Improvement Board Committee. Or perhaps, as is most likely the case, they took one look and realized their reputation could be besmirched. In the religious tradition of the day, they may have considered themselves defiled. Or, as is often the case on a dangerous road, you don't want to be the one who ends in the ditch on such a dangerous place. Dr. King told that story in Memphis, and most of the audience would have heard that the person in the ditch were the sanitation workers. But Dr. King often told that story by saying, the people in the ditch are the American citizens. And the one who comes along that you think least likely to care for that person at that time was the civil rights movement. Because Dr. King would say over and over, think about the ways and institutions in the United States that we tend to treat those who don't look like us, who may appear to be dangerous, who we feel have already failed. What will happen to us if we take care of them? How in the world, when we have a primary mission of being a clinical system of health care, can we possibly take care of all of these other people in the community? What will happen to us? And Dr. King reminded us over and over, that's the wrong question. It reminds me of the guy a few years ago who at a party said to me, you know who's really suffering in this country? I said, no, who? He said, you and me. You and me. How is that? He says, a couple of older white guys in this country. It's all just being taken from us. And then he said, you want another drink? This notion that if somebody else who we don't know, who we don't trust, who we're not sure about, gets the care, there won't be enough. So I want to posit that there may be a very practical way for us to think about this. And then I'd like for you to use your imagination of what that might look like. So somebody who's taken this very seriously is my friend Mike Mather, who's a pastor at Broadway United Methodist Church. If any of you know him, take a photo of me up here hawking his book. so that when all those many proceeds come in for him, that he'll give a part of the share. Mike is a pastor at Broadway United Methodist Church, and when he went there, the church had quite a number of programs to help people in the neighborhood. They had a food pantry, they had a clothing pantry, they had a youth program that during the summer brought in 250 kids from the neighborhood. And Mike had been a part of developing those programs years before when he had served as an associate. And when he came back, he realized things hadn't changed much at all. And so he began the mantra, we've got to stop helping people. Now, folks who were a part of those programs didn't take too well to that, either those who were helping or those who were being helped. But his point was, we're treating people as victims. This is a one-way street of charity. It's not that Mike doesn't want to offer assistance, but that alone is not enough. Sometimes in very professional, well-educated, thoughtful organizations, our tendency is to ask, what can we do to help you? As opposed to thinking about how is it that the solution may be in the very problem, or be in the very place that we see as a problem. John McKnight, who is one of the founders of the ABCD movement, Asset-Based Community Development, used to go around and talk to groups like this, and he usually got an introduction similar to one that Robin gave me, talking about what few virtues and accomplishments I might have along the way. John had a whole long list of them, and when the person would go through that, he would then get up and say, yeah, but you know, my hair is starting to recede here, and at my age, my GI system just isn't what it used to be, and I got this scar right here. And at that point, people in asset-based community development knew exactly where he was going with this, and some of you do too. Why is it, he said, that we go through certain neighborhoods and all we see is what's wrong? And we go through other neighborhoods and all we see is what's right. And so Mike, building on this notion of asset-based community development, started doing something that some of you who work in the community already do. And that is, you posture yourself in such a way as to listen first, to ask questions, and to connect the dots. You'll hear about people who are already doing great work in infant mortality by doing just that. Listening within the community to what some of the root causes are, but also connecting the dots to who the leaders and the influencers are, and then doing something about it. Let me give you a practical example for them. Mike hired a member of staff called a roving listener. Wouldn't you like to get paid for that? And the roving listener went from porch to porch throughout the neighborhood and asked 3 questions. The first question was, what do you do so well that you could teach somebody else? Most folks who live in that neighborhood have just been told directly and indirectly, you need something, you lack something. Here was somebody who was asking, what do you do so well that you could teach someone else? And then second, the roving listener would ask, what are 3 things you'd like to learn or do? And then they added a third question as a religious body. They said, who besides God and me are going to help you accomplish that? It was the way for them to ask about the social web, the network, the support. And what that roving listener did, and then over the summer they employed youth to be roving listeners to go around and listen in their neighborhood, is they would come back and there was a huge wall in the basement of the church with Post-it notes. These are the things that these people said they could teach so well. These are the things people said they wanted to learn or know or do. and they began to connect the dots. And people who were not eating well and concerned about food were connected with people who cooked so well that they began to develop their own catering services. And the church, as an anchor institution, got their catering license for their kitchen so that these entrepreneurs in the neighborhood could begin to cook and teach others about healthy meals. It was not without plenty of uncertainty and ups and downs and scandals along the way. But do you understand why I think this is a posture that among influential, sophisticated, well-educated people, we will have to take in order to improve community health and in order to address those audacious 10-year enterprise goals? We so often look at the one who has come to us as the one we're called to serve, to fix, to take care of. And what will it take for us as an institution with deep roots and tremendous assets to first listen, to be attentive, to understand, if you want to use the principles of ethics, that charity is a one-way street and justice goes both ways. That we somehow know better ourselves when in the principle of autonomy, we listen clearly, not only to what that individual has to say, but to what those around who are part of that support network have to say. Coming together is a beginning, keeping together is progress, working together is success. Whatever good comes out of this presentation has been from working together with Naomi Plasky, one of our administrative fellows sitting back there who did a lot of the research, and Sarah Rush, the program manager in Mission Values, who, if anything I do ever gets done on time, gets done because of her. But it's also about us in this room. So I'd be interested. This is the session, or this is the part of the presentation that's often referred to as questions and answers. Well, I've got questions for you that I'd love to hear your response, but also willing to just get your feedback. With the enterprise goals that we've talked about, with the notion of an anchor institution, with the assets you believe are available, how can you imagine that a healthcare system might behave differently from the way it does now, so that something like the examples you saw earlier might become a part of our DNA? Or if you just want to start with, I think you're just full of it, Kevin. Let's get your microphone there, so that's all right.
I don't think medicine can be seen as something which is outside of the community where they are, of the state. And one of the problems I've noticed, for example, is the fear that some people may have to be sued.
Say some more about it. How do you overcome that fear of being sued in order to create a healthy community? Yeah, do you feel that? Do you feel within a sophisticated organization like this that if you step out too far, you're going to get a call from the legal department or compliance? Is that real? Yeah. How do you overcome that? I think part of it is beginning the conversation even with compliance and legal. I'm here to tell you, I know a lot of those folks, they don't have horns. They care about the community as much as you do, and testing those ideas. Sunita?
One of the things that you're presented here today is a paradigm shift of how community and clinical settings have to start communicating and looking at ways of addressing many socio-determinants of health that you have highlighted. In Indiana, I think we have opportunities, but I looked at how much that is invested in the community so that's right, it was like, okay, we are doing something. And if we are not getting something out of this, then there's something wrong somewhere. And I'm yet to find out what is it that is not done right. Or maybe we have not understood our people. Or maybe we have to go again back to the community and learn from our population what is it that they can contribute to make Indiana a healthier place.
Yeah, and again, so twice we hear that theme of fear. What fears do we have to overcome? It could be being sued, but the other fear is we haven't done it that way. Or the fear that often engages us, well, we barely have enough resources the way it is. How can we do that? Go back to that question that Dr. King asked. What will happen to me if we do that over here? And ask, what will happen to us if we don't?
I really think on him also the feelings of abundance or scarcity. So if we feel that we have abundance, then we do are able to do more things. Since I work inside the hospital, it seems frequently that it's hard to think about going into the communities, and I'm afraid a lot of the people that do work inside in the hospital may not even come to this because they don't think of themselves as needing to work in the communities as well, and the ways that we could do things and how we can enable. I hear about grants, but when you're in the thick of things, you don't really know how to even start those kind of programs.
Yeah, so the word community is slippery, isn't it? Because there are lots of communities. We could talk about geography and talk about neighborhoods and say, well, gosh, I don't live in this neighborhood. How would I know anybody? Well, you can walk out this hall right now, and I guarantee you that you're going to come across 3 people on your way out who live in this neighborhood. But do we know that? Do we recognize them? Do we ask them? Part of the encounter that these other health systems and hospitals went through in the redevelopment of their neighborhoods was to begin with the list of addresses of where their employees were residing and to bring together groups of folks to say, tell us about your neighborhood. Tell us what you think the needs are. Tell us who the people are who are the influencers and what they have to offer. Okay, Charles?
So I have a comment which is probably rather obvious, but when I was listening to your presentation, I thought about resource deployment in the sense of you talked about the medical, the clinical greatness and the medical resources that we have, recognizing those, valuing those, but thinking about how to deploy them, because I think often there is frustration about we have great doctors, we have all this research, we're not really making a difference and we're not moving the needle. So when you recognize what's happening in the broader picture, these are the resources we have, this is how we deploy them, and you also recognize that there are other factors. And so how do you address those as well?
Yeah, and let me be really clear. I think we are making a difference clinically. I don't want anybody leaving thinking otherwise. But it's about building on that, and it is about resource deployment. I think one of the challenges we have is we, at this point, have a culture in which we believe somebody else has full charge of that resource deployment. And yet I can point you to several places around this system in which people are doing work in infant mortality and behavioral health, and they didn't ask anybody for permission, but they began to organize in such a way that there were people starting to come to them saying, how did you do that? and reallocating those resources. I'm also well aware that sitting in here are a number of folks from the IU Health Foundation, which I consider to be a pretty important resource because we have grateful patients and donors who are looking for ways to improve health because of the affinity they have for you and your work. Somebody up back there?
It's kind of a piggyback, I guess, to what was said previously, but just very briefly, I think having the discussion, continuing to have the discussion on race, class, culture, and gender is really, really important because it's very easy to live in a bubble where you are working, for instance, Methodist Hospital, working within the confines of Methodist Hospital, but without having those critical discussions often and making them more comfortable, we don't know how to even reach out of our bubbles to approach other cultures, other people, other identities, to see how we could actually help them. So alleviating the fear of having those discussions, I think, on a base level is huge.
Yeah, and that's a whole other conversation, isn't it, about the ways in which we acknowledge those who we perceive to be somehow different than us, and how do we begin that conversation? Yeah. Here, let alone somewhere else.
I have a question that's been texted in from Ball Memorial. The healthcare is becoming a financially precarious business. How can IU Health move with or move past a culture of scarcity, thinking when it comes to our resources?
Yeah, this is the central theme, isn't it? We have been a health system that has done very well financially in the past. The very reason that we have such large capital projects so far is because we've managed our money very well over the last 10 years when other health systems haven't. We've made a decision to provide rather abundantly in these capital projects. But I think one of our greatest challenges is going to be, how do those projects not merely become buildings, but how do they become models of care? And it's those models of care that I think leave us with an opportunity of abundance over scarcity. We're a $6.5 billion enterprise. We do more than any one of us has any knowledge and awareness of. And yes, every one of us in this room, myself included, could say, you know, I tried that and those finance people told me it wasn't going to happen. That's exactly what happened in Camden, New Jersey, what happened at Bon Secours, what happened at Johns Hopkins. The initial pass was, are you out of your mind? Again, reimbursements are declining, acuity is increasing. Where's this going to come from? And I'll admit, this is the community organizer in me talking. You begin with who you have. Jay Foster is in this room, who we recently hired as a vice president of chaplaincy, spiritual care, and congregational partnerships. And that third item to me is really important. The board and the administration of IU Health said, we're governed by Indiana University and by the United Methodist Church. How are we going to leverage our partnership with the United Methodist Church and other religious bodies? On any given weekend, 20 to 25% of Americans find themselves in a congregation. And in those congregations are not only healthcare workers and people who need healthcare, there are influencers and leaders. And one of Jay and his team's role is to develop a new project, a new way of thinking for us in how we deliver care, often using the people who live in the neighborhood and are connected to IU Health already. And Jay is in this role because the board and the administration said that we want to put resources into that. We believe it's important, and we've seen how it's worked. What else can we think about? Somebody?
It's amazing to me that the word fear just keeps rummaging around. And I think that's the big thing, is being with people where you're uncomfortable. And it's race, it's mental health, it's all of those factors, and our ability and our capacity to do that, and our willingness to be courageous.
Other questions? William?
So I have a comment and I have a question. So the comment is that I really appreciate you and all of your team creating this opportunity for us to have a conversation regarding healthcare. And what I draw from this conversation is that we are expanding our own definition of what it means to be in healthcare. That we are seeking to partner with community when in the past there have been silos. Community comes to the hospital. Some aspects of the hospital go to the community. And so this seems to be a conversation where we are broadening what it means to be community and to be in communion with the community, so that there is an idea of leadership providing us insight concerning what's happening in the community and how we can share in this partnership together. When I hear fear, it's a collective. It's not just fear in the hospital. It's not just fear in the community, but it's part of humanity. And so I'm hearing the call for us to be greater as human beings, greater as individuals within healthcare, so that 10 years from now will not look like where we are today. In other words, we are creating something total. We're speaking about transformation. And transformation is stepping on top of what has been and creating something totally different that we can never even imagine. And so I can get the fear, but I can also get the possibility. And so as I'm hearing you speaking about what is possible for our future within healthcare, I also hear the invitation for us to come together, look at, is it really our fear, or is it really our unwillingness to grow and to expand? Because that's where the possibility lies, when we grow and when we expand. And I become better because I am inviting others into my space of what I call myself a community and how I define myself as a human being. I become better when I begin to reach out and recognize that we're all brothers and sisters.
So let me end with this. As Robin pointed out, this was to be an introduction into future conversations about our enterprise goals. What I want to leave with you are the three questions that I hope you'll have in the back of the mind for every presentation that you hear, whether it's about smoking or infant mortality or behavioral health or obesity. To whom are we listening? Are we listening to the smokers and those who are struggling with obesity? And the simple answer to that is yes, of course, we are. But press one another for how are we listening? Are we listening in our space or in theirs? Are we listening in the context of a safe space for them or a safe space for us? Secondly, to believe that every person who we're here to help has something to offer, and to be willing to ask the question, what is it that you know about this problem that you could teach me and others? And the third is, how are we connecting the dots? We're a complex organization. And by golly, why have a 30-minute meeting to connect the dots if we can't have an all-day retreat? But we don't need that for everything. How do you leave from here? And whether you're thinking about your own work right now or about these enterprise goals, how do you believe we're connecting the dots? Now go find somebody else who's also working at that same thing. I believe you all are here either because you needed a little bit of extra credit or because you're very concerned about the health of our greater community in the state of Indiana. I believe we can be a much healthier state. I believe those enterprise goals are one venue in which that can happen. And I believe that you and your colleagues have the ability to influence those resources being distributed in such a way that we don't spend our time saying, but what's going to happen to me, and talk about what's going to happen to us. Thanks for that commitment, and let's keep the conversation going.